Welcome to our knowledge transfer sessions. My name is John Erickson. I represent Fortress Mega, and today I have two people who I get to interview today. It's kind of exciting. Why don't you introduce yourself, guys?
Hi, my name is Jesse Paulson. I'm with Sound Team Realty.
And I'm Fletch Newland, also with Sound Team Realty.
And so the cool thing for me is, being a financial planner, I like to know, I kind of like everything about the financial services world. And one of the things I've always wanted to do is bring different experts into the office and ask them all the questions I would want to ask them, but be afraid to ask them when I'm hiring you, right?
Absolutely.
I get to ask you questions, I get to offend you today, and,
offend away.
bring all the good stuff.
We're pretty hard to offend, I think, technically, but we'll see.
We'll see. You might make us cry.
Yeah, we'll try. So the goal today is to give people good knowledge about one of the biggest financial topics, buying and selling a home.
Absolutely.
And today what we want to do is we want to talk about, the concept of how do we cut out the middleman? How do we, I would say that the joke as American is, I want all the service you provide, but none of the cost.
And we're talking about in regards to selling your home, right?
Right, exactly. Or buying, technically.
Or I guess buying too, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of ways that we can talk about this for sure. There's, when you're going to sell a home as the homeowner, there are so many pieces to it, and I think that if we break it down a little bit into kind of chapter heads, if you will, that might help.
Well, let's give you those chapters in our standard disclosure. So before we get into the chapters, our standard disclosure is on the screen right now.
Good point.
We want to make sure this is treated as general information. Don't go list your house tomorrow with what these yahoos say. I'm kidding.
Nothing good comes of that.
That's right.
But within that, we want to talk about some basic topics about how do you cut out the middleman. There's 5 we would generally identify. How do you value your home? What is it worth?
Right.
How do you get it ready to sell? How are you going to list it? How are you going to put it out there so people know it's for sale? Then how do you negotiate? What's the negotiation process look like? And then just basic closing tips and things of that nature, basically, right?
Sounds good.
Let's get into it. So,
I'll cover a few things.
Yeah, I'll cover it. Hopefully we don't talk too long.
Well, we've been known to talk a long time.
Right. So tell me some stories about valuing my home, right? So, like, when I sold my home, right, my kid was born first time there, right? I could show you the stain on the carpet where my dog, had some issues at one point or another, right?
Of course.
But it was my home, right? And I wanted the best price, right? I was not going to accept no measly offer, right? So just explain this concept of, like, if you're going to do this yourself, how do you value your home? Like, how do you actually go through and be more objective than that?
First off, valuing a home is more art than science.
Most of this is probably more art than science.
Most of it's more art than science.
All right.
So, but with that said, if you've lived there for 5 years, 15 years, 25 years, 50 years plus, whatever that may be, this is your home. You know the intricacies. You know all about the home. You know that banister broke 10 years ago, but you've learned how to live with it. But what you've got to be able to do is you've got to be able to take that owner's hat off, set it over here, and put your buyer's hat on. And you've got to be able to objectively come in and say, this is what a buyer is going to be looking for. It's huge. It's a big piece.
And there's maybe nothing more important than that change of hats.
Yes.
And there's, I think, definitely nothing harder.
Right.
Because of all those things you're saying, when you know the value to you, but the value to you does not necessarily translate to the value to the client, to the buyer.
You're saying that wallpaper I put on in 1974 doesn't have the same value to a buyer as it does to me?
Things do come back around, so if your timing's right, maybe.
I want some orange and browns in my house, right?
Yes, and shag.
And shag carpet.
Yes, exactly.
Preferably pre-smoked in.
So the value really, what comes when we're looking at value, and what you should be looking at value is what will a buyer pay for your home? Now, if you are in a cookie cutter neighborhood, from 2005, 2015, and every house is 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, or whatever, and you're in this big neighborhood of such, and you all have the same finishes, you could ostensibly use price per square foot. You could say, okay, I know those 3 houses over there sold for this at this price per square foot, so therefore I'm going to take my price per square foot up just a little bit because it's a seller's market or whatever. But if you're in a neighborhood of 1940s homes or 1970s homes or whatever it might be, and there is a big mix, price per square footage is hard. You can't really use it. You've got to take the square footage of your house, the number of beds, the number of baths, the lot size. Is there a view? Is it on a busy street? Do you have sheds? And compare it to everybody else. And to be able to do that, again, you've got to be objective about it. You can't just say, well, my house is better, so therefore it's got to be more than that. So that's a big piece of valuing your home.
You can, and people do that.
Well,
and that,
okay, that's
unfortunately, is a big problem. Your neighbors that nobody really likes all that much, that have a washing machine and 2 broken cars, next door to you, but the other house we're going to compare it to doesn't have that. Well, guess whose house is worth more? Even though you might have better finishes in your house.
Right.
Sure, at some point they're probably going to move, or it's an apartment complex, and they can all change at any given time. There's just so many variables. One of the few times where there's more science than art is Jesse's, your comparison of similar vintage, similar layout, similar style, and people haven't had a chance yet. They've just started to sell the turnover of the houses,
right.
And we haven't added on a new wing or redone all of our kitchens, and things are more or less the same. Then that price per square foot can be huge, but otherwise people oftentimes think it's huge, when in fact it really has no bearing. It just gets in the way.
And one of the questions I had for you within that, before we move to the next topic, is this idea of comparables, right? I've heard this a lot in this industry. I want to talk to other people. What's a comparable? Like, kind of walk me through what that means.
In an ideal world, you want to keep houses that are currently on the market. That's certainly of interest to help know where you might consider positioning yours. But as far as determining value goes and looking to comparable homes, you mostly just need to look at what has sold, because you can see what was the asking price and then what was the sold price, what's real. So to do that, you want to be looking at homes that sold as recently as possible, because within the last 3 months, things might have been pretty similar, but 6 months ago, the market changed massively. So looking at a house that sold 6 months or 7 months ago really might not be of any help. So you want to look in as tight a proximity as possible, because we all have this great view of Mount Si, but just half a mile away, there's no view, and there's a difference there. Right. So as close in proximity as possible, with homes that have sold as recently as possible, is where you always want to start. And then you start comparing things like square footage, the sold price, how many car garage, how many bedrooms, etc., 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 etc. And that, again, is where science is just out the window, and it's completely art.
Okay. And the hard thing with science is that there are websites out there that offer their automated valuation.
Yeah, I've gone to like Redfin and Zillow, right?
Exactly. Bingo, those are the two.
Yeah.
The algorithm. So those websites, what they do is they look at the hard information that's on the tax records. They look at bedrooms, they look at bathrooms, they look at what it sold for versus what somebody else sold for a couple of years ago, and they put all this into their algorithm, and they come up with this, whatever their rough estimate is. The hard part with that is that those websites haven't been in your house. They haven't been in the other comparable houses. They are looking purely at statistics. Now, it's a great way to start, so you can kind of get a feel, but when you're really getting into the nitty-gritty of it all, you got to look at much more than that.
It's not actionable information.
Yeah. Right, and so that actually brings us to the next topic, getting your place ready, right? Because, getting into your house, right, you just, if you have those beater car in your house that your uncle left there years ago and you never took out of the way, right? It's going to impact your value. So you make it hard to sell.
Absolutely.
Right. So, how do you get your house ready? Like, what's your game plan for you guys? Like, how would I get a house ready? What's your process?
Depersonalization, getting rid of things that are purely yours is a big start. So you walk through the home. Again, it's hard. You put your buyer's hat on and you say, I don't need to see a picture of Grammy and Grampy up there on the wall. You want to make sure that this home is ready for a buyer to walk through and be able to envision themselves in this home. So we recommend staging. And the reason for staging isn't our stager doesn't come in and say, well, this would make this room really livable. The stager comes in and says, this makes this room really presentable to buyers, both in person, but also in photos. In this day and age, everything is online. So you can see pictures, you can see videos. So it's got to be presentable in multiple different ways. So preparing your home for buyers to come in and envision themselves living there so that they'll pay money for your home, that's the biggest piece.
And if we're offering advice, which is kind of how this is, I think, meant to be going, is if you're going to go this route, no one wants to see the family beach pictures. When in doubt, take it out is a great mantra. The idea isn't, if you have this beautiful L-shaped, massive, overstuffed couch that just works for you, it's not going to work for the next people. You need simple. You need people to walk in and go, oh, I can imagine my table here, and that's the wall I want to watch TV on, not whatever these people are doing. All of these kinds of things. So it's simplicity.
Yes.
You want things fairly sparse.
Yep.
No one's going to mind if you cram your closets and even to a degree your garage full of stuff. But when you're looking around at different bedrooms and the kitchen and the living rooms, etc., simplicity. Just keep it simple and sparse.
Buyer wants to see how they can live there, not how the seller has lived there for however many years.
If you have so much stuff in there, they can't envision how their stuff's going to go there.
Right. So, and I've noticed when I've gone to buy houses.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
right.
must be nice.
Yeah.
Well, player. No. So when I've been in this process and looked through it, I always noticed I gravitated to the houses that were more sparsely decorated. Right. The more sparseness it was, the more I focused on the house. Right.
Bigger. It feels bigger.
Right.
And yet, the houses that don't do the staging, clean everything out.
Right.
It's this echoey thing that people don't. It doesn't feel like a home.
It does. You can't envision yourself in there because there's nothing in there.
And how do I do this, or where would that go? Or it's a completely different thing. So the value of staging has been proven over and over and over again to help people typically sell their house for more money and more quickly. So again, we're back to the art thing, and I think that's just going to probably keep coming up because there's not just a one couch / divan, one side table, and that's all this room ever gets. Period. Move on. You just never know.
Yeah, but someone, I've always found, especially in my practice.
I said Devon.
Yeah, you did. Devon.
I like that. No, but I found in my practice, whenever I challenge someone, it's a lot of work. There's always gonna be that person who's gonna do the work, right, and learn it. And it's cool.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah, that's what we're here for, to help out.
So you guys, you talk about staging. Getting it ready is gonna be critical. Okay, so now we're getting to the listing portion, right? So I've done all this work. I've got this ready. Now I gotta list it. And let me ask you a hot question. So I think my house is worth $1 million. What do I list it at?
It really depends on the market. So if you would have asked us this in 2021, when the interest rates were in the threes, when it was even more of a seller's market, there wasn't a lot of inventory.
It's worth $2 million.
Yeah. We might have listed it slightly below that because we wanted to generate multiple offers.
Buzz.
And we wanted to get as many people in that house as possible, so we would set an offer review date. So then we would hopefully get multiple offers on offer review date. Come 2022, May of 2022, once the interest rate, started to pick back up, and then later that year we saw them in the sevens, that strategy was out the window. You did not want to list it for anything below what you wanted. Not that you would necessarily get it, but it was, you didn't want to list it low. Because if you listed it low and got an offer for that, and you didn't sell it, the buyers might get angry and there might be other things that happen. So it really depends on the time of the market, what the interest rates are, what's selling, all of that.
And in that frenzy, like when the rates were low, people were bidding up and they knew they were bidding up. Everybody was, it's almost for some people you could hear this badge of courage or of pride. I spent $200,000 over asking. Woo, you must have gotten a really good house. Well, then it was our attitude as buyers, brokers, buyers, representatives, where I don't care what you're asking, we're not offering that. We're coming in below that.
Yeah.
So knowing what's going on within the market is critical.
And it's a month by month. It can be a week by week, month by month change. You just don't know. You've got to be able to just kind of see what's going on.
And very often we don't know until we're at least 2 weeks into a change. Right. If we're like, I got a feeling maybe something's happening, the hair on the back of the neck kind of thing. And you don't quite know for sure. It doesn't come to fruition for sure until a little bit later. And that's if you were working every day, paying attention, educated, etc.
And if you're going to sell your home on your own, you should absolutely be doing this work. You should be understanding what the market is doing at that particular point.
Well, it's interesting you said that because we talk about listing your property. I think the dream for a lot of people is, of course, they sell it to their friendly neighbor's kid who,
of course,
it's easy.
And they often think they're going to.
Right, and it's agreed upon price. The financing is going to be there. You just go to the lawyer. That's the dream, right? And I think a lot of people get that. But when we talk about listing, right now we're putting our offer on the open market. We're not in that game where we're going to everyone. How do you get the word out there?
in all of these situations, if you're not going to employ a professional to do this, then you're everything from, doing a nice magic marker crayon sign in the yard that's really, really cute and it draws attention.
My 4-year-old can do that.
Yes.
And they could probably do it brilliantly. That's great. But maybe no one's going to see it other than your neighbors right around there that drive past it, which might be enough. On up to where you can pay, in some cases, different companies a flat fee just to put things up on the MLS, the multiple listing service, which is where the masses go with the big websites, etc., to actually gain access. And then in between, you might be able to do things like the Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or what have you.
Yeah.
So different sellers have different wants and needs and resistance to the help, and you'll find what fits along those.
The fact of the matter is just like in every industry, there's people that want to do it on their own, and there's people that want help, and everything in between. And there are opportunities for everybody in this market to be able to do what they want. I mean, Fletch, your first home that you bought before you became a broker.
Yeah, this is. I actually feel like this informs me and how I do my work, actually. But I bought my home a little over 20 years ago. Jesse had not yet become a broker yet. You've got 20 years experience, so we just kind of missed each other. And my approach was not so much to avoid paying a broker or anything. I didn't really know how any of that worked. I had always, when it was back to renting houses, I'd drive a neighborhood till I found something that would come up that I really liked, and I'd go after that. And so I kind of took the same approach to buying a house. And I knew the neighborhood I wanted, and I drove around till the right thing came up, went in, checked it out, didn't know all kinds of things I didn't know. And some of the things you've already mentioned on your list, we'll address here more in a minute, I'm sure, inspections and such. But came up to the price that I wanted to do. I was smart enough, and my God, folks, please, if you're going to do from any part of this continuum that we're talking about, at the very, very least, go and take the paperwork to a real estate attorney who can make sure that you're not being taken advantage of, because you don't know the rules like the other side knows the rules if they're properly represented. So I at least did that, and I got the clean bill of health for the offer, and the paperwork was all fine, and proceeded to closing, and I was all excited, and we sat down to sign final paperwork, and we're going through all the line items, and here's the money that you paid your real estate broker. I didn't have a real estate broker. Yeah, you did, and here's what you paid. I didn't have a real estate broker. Oh, let's look a little deeper. Oh, it's the same person that was representing the seller that then said he was representing you, and there's that big chunk of money that you are collectively paying to pay that person who didn't do a doggone thing for me. And that really, I already, if I had any feelings about real estate people, it was probably smarmy, white-shoed, and and boy, that cemented that for a very, very, very long time. And shortly thereafter, Jesse got into this business. We've been friends forever, and for a while he was trying to say, we could do this really well together. It's like, I don't like you people. I like you, but you people that do this kind of thing, it took years for me to be interested in even having the conversation, because that was such a bad experience.
And we're still working on calming them down. Still working on calming. So the big takeaway though is go, if you're going to do this on your own, or anywhere from on your own to paying a flat fee to put the information on the Northwest multiple listing service or whichever multiple listing service, just do yourself a favor. Go get that paperwork looked at by an attorney. It's huge. Yes, Fletch did not see that piece where he was paying that broker, but there's so much other stuff that could have been missed.
And that ends up coming out in that's not part of the contract, as it were. Correct. Back in those days. Yeah. And it was just stuff that comes out in the line items when escrow comes to you. Yep. So it was, I did my part the best I could, but...
Well, that's actually brings us to the next topic, negotiating, right? So we talked about so far listing, we've talked about valuing your place, we've talked about getting it ready to stage, but now we get to the negotiation standpoint. So we're getting into the negotiation standpoint of this, and it's actually really interesting because you talked about your experience, like you knew how to generally stage, you know how to look at prices to your best of your ability at that time. You could find a listing, like you went out there and bought something, and then you got hosed. And I would argue that understanding how the negotiation process works is actually maybe the hardest part of this. I don't know if that's true, but when I've been in this process, I was like, I don't understand this whatsoever. And I thought I'd put a twist on you guys, right? So you've represented buyers before, right?
Uh-huh.
And if you came to me and I'm a seller and I have no one representing me, what are the type of things that you try and do, or in your best interest, your client's best interest, to get the best deal for them that I wouldn't be ready for? Like I would not be ready for this situation.
Big thing that we'd be looking for. Let's say you've got a home that was built, 2016 or later. So anytime between 2016 and later, that was in King County.
Okay.
And it's subject to what's called the King County Sewer Capacity Charge. If you didn't know any better, it's in our buyer client's best interest to check mark the box that says you, the seller, will pay any assessments prior to closing. And I'm kind of paraphrasing the verbiage there, but on the contract, if that box is checked, what that means is escrow or the attorney, whoever is going to be handling the closing, is going to collect from your proceeds the amount of money that's left over for the King County Sewer Capacity Charge. You're going to pay that from your proceeds. And if we were representing you as a seller, what we would do is we would say no, because this particular 15-year fee is for whoever's living there, and that we would then pass that.
Assist that it transfers.
It transfers to the buyer.
Interesting.
So,
just one little thing of which there can be lots depending on a given situation.
Absolutely. And that is definitely just one of many things that you'd want to be looking for.
So if I was to go through a general contract I receive, right? Because, I get an offer. It's really a contractual offer, right?
Correct.
Right, and so and really contracts are flowing back and forth. Even the counter offer is an offer. So are most of the time the contracts coming from the buyers, or are they coming from the seller back to the buyer? Like how's that? Like who's building these contracts that could have you pay an extra 2% to the broker or this check mark here?
If both parties are represented by a real estate agent, then the buyer typically, most of the time, will generate the first contract to the seller. Then the seller looks at that contract with their broker, will then counteroffer back, and then it goes from there to there. If the seller is represented by a broker and the buyer is not represented by a broker, we've done it many times where we will draft the contract on our seller's behalf, and then the buyer has the opportunity to review it. Again, we would recommend, if you're that buyer that's doing it on your own without representation, please take that paperwork to an attorney.
Right.
So typically, though, it is the buyer and the buyer's broker or the buyer that initiates the paperwork.
So when we're talking about negotiation, like if one side's represented by a broker and the other's not, there's knowledge and power there. It could work out totally. You can always there's lots of ethical people, but you yourself said your job is to represent one party, right?
Yep.
And
absolutely,
right.
I will say the caveat though is that we still have to abide by ethics, right? We're not going to do anything that is going to cause harm to the other party, but we do have to make sure that we are representing our client to the best of our ability.
That's fair. So it's interesting. So I would say that that's if I was to look at this, I'm going to do this myself, understanding that I'm going to have potentially people with expertise coming at me, and they may actually want to write in the contract, commission for them, right? Depending on the situation. So even though I'm trying to avoid fees, my buyer or seller, whoever's being represented on the other side, they might actually have someone who has a vested interest to make sure there are some level of fees in there, even if it's only half, right? Because it might be a split situation. I don't understand compensation yet. We're going to do another video on that one.
Yeah, lots to talk about there.
Yeah, I know, right? But just that negotiation around that point, you got to be you better have a good lawyer, not just a lawyer, someone who's not going to just check the box for you, but someone who understands this, can explain this to you for the fees you're paying to protect you, right?
Absolutely.
There's not a bigger, I think we talked about it in the first segment, but there's not really a bigger purchase that most people make. There's not something that has more of a bearing on people's financial futures than buying a house typically. And the devil's in the details, yeah. So if we're ever up against somebody on the other side, and if we don't typically make it, it's not typically an adversary type of situation.
It's not up against, but it's
really
negotiating, yeah.
But if the person on the other side is not represented, and we are, our number one priority is to take care of our clients the best we can. And sometimes that can be a real big difference, and sometimes not so much. It just Everything kind of
Case by
depends
case.
on it. Yeah.
And to your point too is if you're an unrepresented seller and you've put your sign out on the lawn and a broker with a buyer comes in, you've got to make sure that you have a firm idea of what it is that you want to do. Do you want to pay that buyer broker? Because if you don't, and that buyer has a buyer's broker, that buyer's broker has to be compensated
At that point, right?
at closing. Because the way that agency law works now in Washington, and it has changed over the last number of years, and it's going to continue to evolve and change, is that a buyer and a buyer's broker get into an agency agreement. And that agency agreement between the buyer and the buyer's broker will state that the buyer will pay buyer's broker X amount, whatever that number is. And if you as a seller say, I am not paying any money to a buyer's broker, which is your right to do, and that buyer doesn't have the money to both be able to pay their broker, but also to be able to put a down payment, earnest money, closing costs, all of that other stuff, that might mean that that buyer can't buy your home, which means you've lost a buyer. That might be your only buyer. So you just have to have that conversation with yourself of what am I comfortable doing? If you're comfortable paying that, great. If you're not, great. You just have to know that there's implications either way.
And we typically, when we're representing our sellers, still consult our sellers about the value of paying the buyer's broker. Because among other things, some of those were just outlined, there's liability involved. And if you have an unrepresented buyer who doesn't know what the heck they're doing, they later learn this, that, or something else that could be an issue and come back and sue you later.
You being the seller.
You being the seller, there's exposure there that you don't want to have. And so it's better for both parties, if it's better for the seller, certainly, that the buyer comes represented.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I think you mentioned this before when we were just chatting, basically, but I always ask you, well, if you were to do this yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you can avoid your commission, right? You can just charge yourself nothing. You said you would actually still pay that other person on the other end, not because you're in this business, but because you understand that there can be poor ramifications if that person's not represented correctly.
There's the legal piece that I was just talking to, just referring to. And then there's when you have the buyer's represented by their broker, you know they are fully invested in making sure that they kind of corral and keep their buyer on track and see this thing through to fruition, which is what the seller wants in the end.
Yeah. The end goal is you want to sell your house, you want to buy a house, you two want to get together and get the deal done.
Right.
So, there could be additional compensation, there could be less compensation. It's just the end goal is the same for both the buyer and the seller, whether you have representation or not.
And if you don't have representation, you don't necessarily know what you're missing, and you end up happy, well, great.
Yeah.
But it is the biggest transaction that has more value and more effect on a person's financial system set up for the rest of their lives than most other thing else. So it may or may not be the time to do that.
So as you're going through the negotiation, I mean, you have all these contracts. There's lots of check boxes on there, right?
Yep.
And there's legal ramifications around this. So you get your lawyer whose job is to help you understand this, explain this. That's great. But let's say you don't have that kind of perfect situation where you're selling it to your neighbor's kid and it's just a friendly transaction, but you're going to list it, and in a seller's market, you're going to get lots of people coming at you to buy from you, basically.
Potentially,
right?
yeah.
Hopefully.
And so now you have just not negotiation with another person, but you have negotiation with the masses. You might have a bidding war, so to speak. Like, how do you get through 5 or 6 or 7 offers? Like, how does that work typically?
It's a good question.
It's one of the most fun situations to be in.
Oh, I don't like to negotiate. What are you doing?
Well, on behalf of the seller, if we're working for a seller or a seller's broker, seller's representative, it's the ultimate situation. That's what we always want. And typically, if just say there's 10 offers that come in, there's often the bottom 3 or 4 that just don't measure up for any.
That's your offer.
That's my offer. That's what I'm writing.
Jesse. And then you typically can weed out a couple of others based on you do your due diligence and look at somebody's lender. You look at how much down payment they're putting in, what kind of earnest money they're putting on, and things where you can recommend to your seller, these are solid offers versus these kind of concern me. And often you'll find yourself with the top 2, 3, 4 offers. And those are where the fun really goes from there.
And let's be clear, you're watching this video so that you can try to do this on your own. Like, these are things that you can do. You want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence with all 10 of these offers to be able to say, okay, these dollars don't match up, so they're out. Then you're going to call their lender, And you're going to say, hey, tell me about, like, we've got a list of questions. So you're going to want to ask questions so that you feel comfortable, because what makes us feel comfortable might not make you feel comfortable. So you've got all of these things that you're going to want to ask, and then you end up, like Fletch said, with the top 3, maybe 4 offers. Then what you really have to do is you've got to look at the apples to apples. What's the earnest
Put
money?
everything in a spreadsheet so you can see all the categories and really compare apples to
I love
apples.
spreadsheets. I'm a numbers person.
Yeah. What's the down payment? Because if you've got somebody that's putting 25% down versus 3.5% down, what happens if you're escalating above the sales price and instead of $1 million, you're not $1,250,000? What's it going to appraise for? You know, are you going to run into an appraisal issue? If you've got somebody that's 25% down, that might not be a big deal. But if you've got somebody that's a minimum of 3.5% down, that could be a big deal. Yet, you know, you got to look at everything.
There's many pieces to the puzzle. And even you're a numbers guy.
I love numbers.
Somebody might not be such a numbers guy, but you have to do the spreadsheet. You've got to put things in categories. You've got to try to understand things the best you can. All the main pieces that are critical parts of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Well, and you guys brought up appraisals and inspections in here. How does that affect the negotiation process? You know, appraisals and inspections. You got any good stories on that?
Oh, do we ever? Do we ever? So inspections. Now, typically, you might not run into an inspection issue or inspection after mutual acceptance if you've got 10 offers. Because typically, the buyers will either waive or they'll do a pre-inspection, that kind of thing. But if you've got one offer that comes in, and the offer is contingent upon an inspection, contingent upon an inspection, then that buyer is going to come through and do their due diligence with their inspector. That handrail that you broke 10 years ago that you got used to, that inspector might call that out. Those rodents that you know have been down in the crawl space.
The chewing.
Yeah, hey, they're down there, but they're not bothering me. You know, that's going to be an issue, right? So the buyer's going to come through and they're going to want to make sure that there's a clean bill of health on that home. And, you know, bats in the attic, rodents in the crawl space. I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff. And
giant pig in the backyard.
He's run into a giant pig in the backyard.
So many stories.
Yes. Oh, so many stories. Anyway, so then there's that inspection period. The buyer's going to come back with a list of things that either need to be done or they're going to come back with the dollar figure. Keep in mind, when we represent a buyer and there's a $5,000 item on the inspection or a group of things that are about $5,000, we know that there could be Pandora's box that gets opened up if once our buyer starts to fix those. So we might say, okay, it's going to cost $5,000, but you know, those rodents, they might have peed all throughout the insulation. So all that insulation has to come out and new insulation has to come in. We don't know that for a fact, but that is a really big potential. So instead of $5,000, we're asking for $7,500. So you never know.
Or if it's a Pandora's box situation, and whether it's the rodent thing or whether it's a little bit of mold up in the attic, and you don't know the degree to which it's gone through the underlayment, and when you're going to change your roof anyway, it might be a little thing, might be a big thing. You might just say, sellers, we want you to resolve this issue. You know it, you're fine, no big deal. Use your own people and your own costs, and we'll just stay out of it. We won't ask for any more money for it. But we don't get ourselves into the potential if we think it's going to be $5,000 and oh my God, now it's $35,000.
Well, let's and we maybe didn't touch on this, when we're talking about, our getting our place ready. But if I'm a seller, I probably need to, if I'm not hiring someone who knows what to do, I might need to pay for an inspection at some point there.
You might.
Just to get, because I don't know everything you described. I'm like, yeah.
The issue that you can run into that though is that if you run into a material fact, let's say you've not been down in your crawl space and the foundation during the 2001 earthquake set it off and there's a big crack down there. If you don't know, you can't disclose it. You just can't disclose it. You don't know. Not that you want to hide your head, but if you do that, now you have to disclose that. Legally disclose that on a seller's disclosure statement, which is part of the paperwork that you as a seller will have to use. So now, that said, an inspector for the buyer, if they do their own inspection, which they should, not everybody has, but which they should.
They darn well should learn.
That's probably going to find it anyway. So, there's risk reward on either side.
Yeah. I actually ran the problem with my mom. She loved my mom. Great. Bought a small little house, built in 1910, no inspection, and of course, the fireplace is out of code.
Yeah. Yep.
The chimney needs to be ripped out. Needs a new furnace. It was fun.
We don't see as many offers without inspection these days. Back when I first started, when the market was crazy, I started in 2004 through 2007 when the market crashed. There was crazy things that happened and no inspections, no sewer inspections. Strongly recommend a sewer inspection. Boy, there's another big one right there. Or septic. If you've got a septic, if it's bank owned or if it's been bank owned at some point and it's a septic, that makes me nervous. Anyway, lots of other things to talk about. So,
well, I love
these
that.
things just kind of go and go.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that you can do, and I got lucky and bought a good house. If you're dealing with a good house, lots of things can work out just fine.
And you as a seller might know it as a good house, and maybe there's defects you just don't know about.
Yeah, and that's very often the case. People are very surprised by things like this.
Yep.
My house is a good house. It's been good to me. I know it'll be good to the next people, and I'm a really conscientious person who cares. Happens all the time, but I didn't know what was going on over there. And then they find out, and it's like, oh, I'm embarrassed. I feel terrible. And then oftentimes it's a great situation and people want to take care of them. But if it's, how dare you suggest there's an issue with that kind of a thing? It's never been an issue before. Did you make that issue? Things can get a little bit more testy.
So negotiation, if we talked about the entire process, when we say negotiation is like the squishiest, like this is like...
Sure. And multiple different types of negotiation.
At different times.
Inspection, appraisal. What happens if you get an appraisal that's low? You as a seller that's putting your home on the market without representation, you get an appraisal that's low. What do you do with that? That's another potential negotiating period right there. Or you could just say no.
So if I was to summarize this, try and bring this all together, I would say that, if you're in this negotiation process, understanding if you're facing another broker or not is going to be critical to this process because they have information you may not, or processes you may not understand, right?
Absolutely. And if you're doing this on your own, we can't stress enough. Go out, get a real estate attorney to look over this paperwork because we want to make sure that nobody gets taken advantage of. There's too many opportunities for people to take advantage of others, and we just don't want that.
And it's just too big of a thing because this, again, is the one thing that it's the biggest transaction most people ever find themselves in, and it has more to do with people's financial future than most other things. So making sure you're at the very least protected is really important.
Right. And so, we've kind of gone on a lot of topics at this point, and I think this is a really good overview, but is there any final thoughts? Little things you're like, someone should think of this if you haven't mentioned so far.
There's so many final thoughts and things that we could bring up.
You have final thoughts?
I know. No.
Something came in your head?
I have
semi-final.
I have continuing thoughts. But the real thing I think for me is if you decide that you want to do this on your own, just make sure that you do your research, make sure that you take your owner's hat off and put the buyer's hat on, and make sure that you're doing everything to maximize your sales price. And one more thing, if we haven't stressed it enough, get a real estate attorney.
We believe big time that in the importance of being properly represented for all the reasons that we've discussed and all the details and things, etc. But there's a different avenue, a different pattern, a different option for almost everybody.
Yep.
And for a lot of people, just getting it done, moving on, and not having to pull other hair out for stress that they feel like is probably coming is a win. And in that case, great. Find what works for you. But at the very least, real estate attorney.
Yeah, if we haven't said that.
Yeah, right. Well, I really appreciate you guys being here today, and my goal is to get more of these videos out there, get you the hard questions. We're going to have to do the one on compensation one of these days.
We will, and we'll be ready for it. I might change my demeanor a little bit when it comes to that, but we'll be ready. Yes, I am.
How do you make money?
Yes.
Right? And there's Washington state laws around this. I have laws around my compensation. They're federal, but there's a lot of challenges talking about it, right?
Absolutely, and they're ever changing for us with the recent lawsuit in the nation that we're not going to get into it here, but with the paperwork that's changed, that's going to change again, and then will change again. It's inevitable, but we stay on top of it so that we can educate you.
That's the thing. Things are right now continually evolving, and it's kind of bit by bit. And so when we come back together for this next time to talk, we'll make darn sure. We had class yesterday. We will keep making sure we're educated and we're up on things, so it's not garbage in, garbage out kind of a thing. We'll make sure that it's proper.
Right.
Well, perfect. Well, thanks guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And one of the things I'll mention, is if you want to learn to do this yourself, great. But if you're looking for someone to give you a personal touch and work with you, I think I'd like to reach out there as a financial planner. I'm trying not to be someone who manages people's money, but I'm trying to have a bigger overall view of someone's situation and really trying to add more value to the situation. And so feel free to just reach out with questions or comments. Why don't you guys add what you had to that?
Yep, absolutely. We're happy to answer questions if you need it. We've been doing this collectively for 28 years. We've got a good idea of what's going on. And, like Fletch was mentioning earlier, education. We make sure that we stay on top of everything that changes and all of the new stuff because it's just too important.
And I hope it comes through to some degree, but we love what we do. We've chosen the right career paths. Anytime that we're doing the work of helping the folks and answering questions, whatever, it's fun for us. It actually is fun for us.
Right.
So if you have questions, do reach out. We're happy to help you however we can.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.